bother with too much. There's 2 more talks going on in parallel that if you were conflicted on which ones to attend, it's okay to attend the other one for this particular case. So what I'll be talking about here is kind of the idea of determining the context of the application so you can be able to dynamically build it and get the right content that goes into the app. I had in the abstract said I would walk through a sample application. I wasn't able to get the application working, so it's just going to be slides in that regard. But we'll take a crack through this. So you have your application, and normally you just load it up and serve it. But the application is composed of lots of different pieces. So you have to decide, what region am I in? What content do I serve in the application? Once I know what I am, okay, are there any specific rules that are different based on the region that I have? Do I have a set of components that are different from some default that I have to load? And then finally, once I have the region and the content and the rules and the components, then I can decide, well, what language do I actually need to serve? So the first one is, you have what region am I in? So as an application, I could be in a browser, I could be on a mobile device, I could be in a browser and a mobile device, I could be a smart TV, I could be, basically, no matter what it is, I'm usually, with the user experience, I have a device of some kind. There are ways you can be able to try and determine where you are. The first one is, are there any saved or persisted cookies that the user may have dropped behind? Is there an accept language list? The user oftentimes has no idea what's on there, and it may have been set by the user or the device. For instance, if you have an Android or iOS and you choose the language of the interface, and then you choose regional settings for how you want the dates and how you want the numbers and so on, you'll get an accept language list from that device, which may have a language and a region. The region may not be the region the device is actually in, with a -U for Unicode and perhaps a calendar setting and a number setting and so on. And so you have information from there which can kind of help you to make a determination. You have GeoIP, so based on the IP settings for what their IP comes in from, that gives you a good hint of where they are. Potentially, you can get within like a few hundred meters, within 100 meters of where they actually are, but it also could be a VPN, and so you think they're someplace which is actually a continent away from where they actually are. Another method that helps, at least to narrow it down, is you, on a mobile device, can be able to determine what keyboard that they're using. And they have a list of keyboards that if you have an application that's already loaded, you can read that list of keyboards to get a general idea where they are. Then, so you can come really close, which is good, because if you don't have any information beforehand, you can at least get the hints in place so you can set up the initial UI so you can ask the user and let them finally decide. At some point with someone coming into your application, if it's where they need to become a part of your application, sign up for it, onboard to it, etc., you should at some point give them the option to say where they actually are, because that makes a whole lot of other determinations in terms of your agreement with them, what jurisdiction, what laws you have to follow, what laws you have to help the user follow, etc. If it's something like a search engine where the relationship's a little bit fuzzier, where they go, oh, they want to be in Russia now? Fine, be in Russia. I'll give you Russian results. Oh, you want to be in Saudi Arabia now? Fine, be in Saudi Arabia. I'll give you Arabic results. But if you have to make certain transactions and things, it becomes a little bit tougher. So what content? So you have different kinds of content. You have generic content in that I have to send an error message to a user. That's probably not going to change from region to region. The network not available is probably going to be the same information no matter where you are on the planet. Log in, please log in. The words will change. The meaning probably is not going to change what you're asking for from region to region. Then you have features. Your application, if it has multiple features, some may be on, some may be off, depending on what region you go to. For instance, you may have a news feed that may be allowed in a region, may be encouraged in a region, may have a news feed that is not allowed in another region. You may have, so in the industry that I'm in, the idea of signing up for a credit card may be allowed in some regions it's not. In some areas, like in the UK, if you need to send money, there may be bank gyros. I never know how to pronounce that. Where it's like doing an ACH in the US, direct bank-to-bank transfer. In other regions, I have no idea what that is. And then you have the jurisdiction. And the jurisdiction, so I say the region, the jurisdiction is where you have laws. And anytime you deal with money, you're dealing with laws. Because when you have a transaction, there's an agreement, either explicit or implicit, between who sends funds and who receives funds, and whether they got them or not, and where it came from, et cetera, and laws that govern how that happens. So there's jurisdictions on what you can and can't do anytime you're dealing with money. Also, dealing with jurisdiction, that helps to decide your data privacy rules. What can the user select or not select? How much, can you choose? Do you need to present to them the ability to choose how to manage their cookies? Are they allowed to delete their cookies? In other regions, you go, well, we don't have to do it, so we're not going to ask it, and that's going to reduce the load on our system. So that'll be a feature that's off, also based on the jurisdictions. So the jurisdictions can drive the features as well as the region drives the jurisdiction. There's other things which I'm not going to go into details here, that also ties in with the jurisdiction. Is you have the country, which is the territory in CLDR, but you also have the sub-region that has an impact. So example, right now we are in, you're sitting in a room that happens to be in ISO 3166 US-CA. CA is the 3166-2 sub-region of US, and that CA has its own jurisdiction, which implies taxes and so on. And ultimately, if you're like a company some of you work for, you need to dive all the way down to the county city level. So because that implies taxes, which are added onto taxes, which are added onto taxes. Or if, for instance, you're in Brazil, you need to know that specific region, because that has an impact on if you are doing transactions of goods between individuals. If you are in like a Sao Paulo municipality, there's different taxes on newspaper and eggs, which are essential goods, as opposed to automobiles and iPhones, which are considered not essential. And then those taxes differ when you get outside the municipal areas. So that's needing to know what those jurisdictions are, because, so examples, so having that understanding of now what region you're in, and what features you have on or off, and what jurisdiction you're in, that then helps you to drive the rules. And those rules then help you decide your navigation, your state machines when you go from one part of an application to another application. And those rules then come from different areas, such as compliance. Are you asking all the right things? Are you following all the right steps? If the idea of who a person is in Europe is different from who a person is in Micronesia, for instance, and the amount of questions you need to ask to verify that you're expected to ask. The rules also dictate the navigation. For instance, if I'm going to expose links to go to different areas within the user agreement or something, if I'm in Germany, I may want to expose links to point to a specific DIN fraud link or something, or I might want to point to a specific EU digital rights link or something. And also, your rules that pop out are restrictions. So restrictions can be in the validations of what a user can and can't enter. User-generated content rules. There might be rules in terms of, there might be legal restrictions about what can and can't be displayed. So if you're in Singapore, for instance, and you're allowed to allow a user to do user-generated content, if you're in Singapore, nobody's allowed to do anything that even implies 18 and above content, basically. If it's images, people, words even. The aspect of required data. You also, based on the market, so there is the aspect of the navigation and just general use of your product, but there's also the idea that you have marketing content that's coming up, pop-ups, campaigns. I want to point a user at this special deal that I have running in my application, or I want to point to my partner site because they paid me to point you to the partner site. Those vary by region and by market, and so that may have an impact on your market feeds for the region, and also could potentially have an impact on your tone of voice. So in Australia, you'll use a lot different tone of voice genre than you might talking to German merchants. Those different tone of voice. So because of that difference in the tone of voice, that means whoever's the content creator has to think about different tones of voice. So those go in different buckets. That would be in place. So if I'm going to point to which bucket to pull from the cloud, I say, okay, I'm in this region, I have these features, I'm talking to these Australian users, I'm going to want to pull from the informal tone of voice bucket, which is important because you have major languages in Australia that include Chinese and Arabic. And so if I want to bring down Chinese informal, that's going to be different than if I'm in China talking to merchants. I'm not going to talk informal to them. So there's that core content of the buckets that I'm pulling from. So you have the region and the rules, and you finally get to a point where you can decide, well, what components do I need to actually create this user experience? So this may be something that's happened already at build time before something gets sent to the App Store, or it's built dynamically on your server before it gets fed to the browser application, etc. But at some point, there are the components that get loaded into the overall, the user experience container that the user is dealing with. So examples like, I'm going to do onboarding for a user. Well, I have various components I have to bring in based on what the rules dictated to compliance that says I have to ask the user not only for their name and address, but I have to ask for, in this region, I have to ask them for their occupation, so it's another component to pop in. I have to ask for their phone number. That seems like a given, so I can help them get their single, basically get the password recovery text. But compliance may have rules that says, well, you can ask them for their phone number, but their phone number can only be from these regions. It can't just be from anywhere on the planet. Compliance may ask additional things. For instance, you Some regions, they'll ask you for your personal identifier number, like your PAN code or your social security number, or others. Like in the US, you usually don't ask that except for very special situations. In some other regions, you always ask it. If you're onboarding and it's a social app, they may ask you for your blood type in some regions, which we don't ever do that at PayPal. But yeah, we haven't gotten to the point where we ask users to pay with blood, so that'll be a little while. And then any application, if you're going to sign up to engage in something where there's I give something and you give me something, that means there's an agreement. Even with Google, when you sign up to become a member, there's a user agreement, which nobody ever reads, I'm sure. PayPal has got the same thing. Spotify, I pulled some examples from, it's got the same thing. That user agreement is reviewed and approved by a legal team or somebody who's contracted to do the legal, and oftentimes it's different when you go from region to region. And if you have different features, that also means what is in the legal text may differ, and that the text itself, the user agreement, may be compiled of multiple pieces that are jumbled together based on the features that are available. So if you say that you can do foo and bar in one region, but you can only do foo in another, and the agreement says they can try and make it foo, bar, etc., some legal people really don't like that. They want it very explicit. So anyway, that's legal reviewed, and if you serve something that's approved for one region but wasn't approved for another, and there's some legal beagle who wants to be sure you're only serving the right thing, they're going to get really upset at you. And they'll come back and say it potentially exposes you and your business to legal exposure, potential fines, potential blah, blah, blah. So you say, yes, sir, or yes, ma'am. Then you want to be sure that you're feeding the right, so you have a legal component that's being pulled in. And that may have more specific sets that it comes from than like your generic network error. So this brings you down to, you end up with regional groups. So you have your generic content, which may apply across all. So this is all before we even get to the language that's being served. This is just the groups of information, content, etc. You may have features, feature sets that are available in some areas and not in others. You have legal content that differs from region to region. And so with that information, you should be able to ideally automatically, programmatically generate clusters. So you have, like feature is a cluster amongst a number of different regions. This legal terminology applies across all these other regions, or this legal component applies across multiple regions. So using that, then those could be used as you're actually building up the application into the final part that the user experience, that the user sees. So to do this, we'll take a look at some examples that are from CLDR. So there's the basic fallback, which anyone that gets into internationalization learns this. So I'm given, there's a language, an optional script, and an optional region. So if I'm given a fully qualified, let's say ZH Chinese in Han S, Chinese for a simplified Han in China, if I can't find that, then I'll fall back and look for Chinese and simplified script. If I can't find that, I fall back to Chinese, and then I get English. But there's some potential problems with that. So example, let's say I'm given ZHTW. I can't find that. So do I just fall back to ZH? Well, ZH is simplified Chinese, not traditional Chinese as is spoken in Taiwan. So you're going to fall back and start presenting them with information that they'll probably be able to figure out. But I've tried this with people that speak Cantonese, traditional Chinese with the simplified, and it's They usually, yeah, I see someone saying, no, don't do that. They complain very quickly. There was a product I was working on, and they had hard-coded because they thought they were doing the simple sort of text where the system is up, the system is down, or click here. And so they thought, oh, we can get by, all we need is 2 letters. All we need is a language code, everything works. 6 years later, someone starts complaining because they started to use that simple thing and said, we could throw some marketing messages here, we could do a little blurb over here, a link there. People from Taiwan started to complain in Hong Kong saying, where's the traditional Chinese? So they had to go back and do a redesign, which ended up, they assigned one engineer, and it took him about 3 months to go back and fix it, because it was embedded in all kinds of other developer sites and so on, and all the assumptions that I don't care what the user throws at me, I'll just take the first 2 letters. Well, we can't quite do that. You get burned somewhere along the line. So CLDR has a better fallback mechanism, and the way that works is no matter what locale you start with, you expand it out using a table they have called likely subtags. So for instance, if I have ZHTW, the likely subtags will then take this and it will flesh it out into, well, this will be a traditional Chinese. So now I start with a ZH Han T TW. Then I can do the fallback if I don't have that. Look for Han T if I don't have that. Then the mechanism still will go back to Chinese and the root. But at least it knows what the likely subtags are. So for instance, if you start with only ZH, it does the likely subtags expansion into ZH Han S CN, which then does the fallback that we saw before. And it also knows what regions, it makes assumptions on the region. So it assumes that if you have just ZH, it would be, the locale would be China. If it's just EN, the locale assumed is US. If you just have FR, the locale assumed is France, and so on. So you need to know that, because if you don't want China and you don't want US, don't want France, you need to be explicit what region that you're asking for, because of what we talked about for what features are available and what the legal content has to be. This is where it gets really fun. So this is the next stage before it gets really fun. So CLDR also has something, as it starts getting to locale inheritance. They have something in the supplementary tables called parent locales. So if a locale, it'll be a parent locale and then a long list. And everything in that list is assumed to have the same weight. So example is with parent locales, like you might have ENAU has a parent locale of EN001, not EN, but English for the world. And then it falls back to root. Or will fall back, then you'll go back into the fallback from EN001. It also will do things like ZHTW and ZH Han T TW are considered to be basically in the same equivalence. That's with the likely subtags. And then, so what happens is you do the parent locales, then you do to get to the parent, and then you do the likely subtags to expand it out, and then use the likely subtags to then do the variant fallback from there. So that gives you a little bit better understanding of the context of what's related to what in that regard. So then the fun part gets into what they call enhanced locale matching. And that's where, let's say your user does have a set of desired languages. Let's say they're in Canada and they have French first and then they have English and they speak Chinese, so they have Chinese on there as well. The normal fallback mechanism would look at these and say, well, let's say I don't have French for Canada, then I'll give them English. It would normally be what you might end up getting. But you'd say, well, I can actually give them a variant for my generic text, just to fall all the way back to French, and that would probably be okay in that case. So then you have, so that's the user's desired languages. Then you have your application. So for you, you have the set of supported languages, only you don't have one set for your application. You end up now having a set that is, what are your available languages for your generic content? What are your available languages for your components or application feature specific? And what are your available languages for your legal content? And then you go to determine what CLDR calls it the best weighted distance, or BWD. So you go, okay, how am I going to put all this together? So your desired languages, we'll start with that. Well, first, where do you even get those? So you have, we mentioned the language accept list, keyboards, persistent cookies, or the user might be able to choose, although in commercial applications, the only places I know where the user can choose, how you say, is presented to the user to allow them to choose something other than one language is, for instance, in your browser, where you can choose your language and what other languages you want to add. You have to go in under the covers. Or it's not specifically asked this way, but it's on your mobile device where you can add additional keyboards. So if you look at mine, it looks like I can speak Greek, Russian, Arabic, Hebrew, and I can speak 3 flavors of Unicode symbols. And so you probably wouldn't get a lot out of that, but potentially you would be serving me Greek or Russian if you didn't have my first choice language. And then what you do is you come in and you assign a distance between each one of these choices that are presented on the list. And I just threw in a number 10 between each one, and the reason why is farther down in the way CLDR specifies languages within a cluster that are similarly related. The distances, if they're close, seem to be less than 10. If they're a little bit farther, are more than 10, and goes from there. The reason why you use some value that's larger than the close distance in between is because if your distance between the user selected languages is like 2, and then it comes down and the CLDR enhanced resolution says, well, I don't have French Canadian, but I have French, and that is a distance of 4, you're going to end up giving them English on the list instead of French, if that's allowed. So it's the distance between languages is implementation defined, and I think the reason why they did that is because there are times when you might say, no, I don't want to give them the content in France. I want to give them what I have in Canada, and the UX might be pretty ugly, but I'm going to give them English for this part, because I'm not allowed to give them content from another country or region for this part of my application. So then there's your applications languages. So ways you can make that work is to take your generic, your features, your legal aspects, and then cluster them according to their attributes, your market specifics, for instance, to then help you determine your own best weighted distance. So this is what CLDR has, these things called match variables. And it's a way of creating an alias. So example is this first match variable is an ENUS. And this says, so if you have any of these values, ASGUMH, so that is American Samoa, Guam, Marshall Islands, no, Marianas, Puerto Rico, United States minor outlying islands, even though nobody lives there unless they're military or science people, United States Virgin Islands. If you're any one of those, then you actually end up being a match variable ENUS. And then you have this other one, the CNSAR, so that's the Special Administrative Regions of China, Hong Kong, and Macau. And they use different layouts and different mechanisms than the standard China, which is simplified Chinese. Then they have the ability to use the actual region codes or to use the United States M49 region codes. And here's a lump called Americas, and that's 019. So that's everything from the top of Canada down to the top of Argentina, and everything in between is Americas. And you'll see why they've put that into place. Then for Arabic, there's a large group for the Maghreb. In the United Nations codes, there is no region code for Middle East. There's region codes for Western Asia, there's region codes for North Africa, but there's nothing for Middle East. So what CLDR did is they built one called Maghreb, which includes most of the North Africa and a little bit up around the loop. So potentially you can create your own clusters if you do have like a Middle East region, for instance, to be able to specify how I want Arabic. Like what I've seen is for Arabic translations from English, they'll choose Saudi Arabia for business and Egypt for social applications and things. So if you choose Guam, it actually becomes part of the US cluster. If you choose Tunisia, you're part of the Maghreb cluster. If you choose Costa Rica, it's in the Americas, somewhere in the Americas. So this helps when you're setting up your feature sets or your market sets. And you don't have to use, if you're building your own, you don't have to use the CLDR specified ones, but what I'm suggesting here is that you can use it as a model to create your own clusters based on features. So I don't expect you to read this, but this is kind of a lump of the language matches using the different clusters that are in place. So drop into one of those. And let's say you have your Spanish from Colombia or Costa Rica, whatever. Well, I don't have that. So let me first take a look to see if, in this case, Colombia, if it's in the Americas set. So if you take the 019, and United Nations code, that expands out to different subregions, one of them being ES419, which is Latin America and Caribbean islands. And then you find Colombia happens to belong in the South American, the Latin America, it's Latin American and the 419, so you go, oh, it's in Americas. So then, using the match sequence, then now it sits into a cluster. And so for, let's say, my content or features, I say, this is available for the Americas. Then I can then grab content for ES Latin, after I expanded the likely subtags, ES Latin Americas. So anything from Americas, then I can go ahead and grab that content. But if I'm asking for Spanish in Morocco, let's say, Morocco is not going to hit this same match for Americas. So there's the second line down, you see an ES star not Americas. And so that is actually a very useful construct, especially used for your feature sets when you have features that are available for a limited range of markets. Let's say you have a feature that's available in 20 markets. Well, there's 200 countries, so you can have a default that drops down to a not this region, which says features off or something like that. So it makes for a real handy construct using that mechanism. And then let's say, and then the ES star star, then it says, if any of the subs match, then use that. So let's say I'm in Spain, the likely subtag comes out to ES Latin ES. And I go, oh, I have content for ES, so I'm going to grab that and just use it and move along. So anyways, using these clusters and these wildcard mechanisms helps. But if you look at this you find out I have the requested language, and then I have the supported language. And then using these match sets then allows you to then drop in to then a distance. And so you're able to use those to compare the distance between the languages on their desired languages. So you take their first language, go through, find the best weighted distance of what's available, and you get a distance. Then you can go to the second language on their accept list or whatever the language list is, and then you can walk through the same exercise to find the best weighted distance, and whichever one is least, that ideally is the content that you serve. But then you have to think about, if I have a full user experience, then I don't want to mix and match, so find out which one is going to win for all of the components that'll be displayed. So you don't end up with, if the user has 3 languages in their desired list, you don't have 3 languages splattered all over the screen for the user. So taking a look at how this might happen is you may create your own list. Let's say you have a feature and create your own feature match regions that may have a list. So this 053, that is Australia and New Zealand. So you don't have to then list all these different countries. And it also has got like the different territories of Australia, which you would normally forget that, somebody says that they're from the, what is it like, where the mutiny on the Bounty ended up, and on some of the, oh yeah, Pitcairn Island, thank you. Yeah, Pitcairn Island, see, I even forgot it. That is listed and it's in under it, I think it's a territory of New Zealand. I'm not sure, but anywhere in there. But you don't have to list them all out. So this one says, okay, I'll take, this feature is available for all of Australia and New Zealand and their territories. It's available in Europe, that's 150, and Canada, China, Japan, Korea, Singapore, US. And then you see this minus Russia. So the cool thing about this is it allows you to take large regions and then do addition and subtraction. So this way, the the United Nations M49, the 150 region code is Europe. That's not European Union, it's Europe. So that's anything between, that's not Asia and not Africa, it's Europe. That includes, and it's considered Moscow as the capital of Russia, so Russia is considered to be part of Europe. Yes, question?
Does that include Turkey?
Turkey, I believe, is in Western Asia according to the UN codes. Yeah. So then you could do plus TR if you want to add Turkey, but they also have an EU as a list under CLDR. So you could do EU, which would be European Union. And if you want to do, let's say, so example with that, let's say you did want to have all of the European Economic Zone plus Switzerland plus Scandinavia, Faroe Islands, then you would do like a 150 plus TR minus RU. And then if there's any others that get created that don't want to participate in the European economy, or the European economy doesn't want them to participate, then you could build it up from there without having to list 30, 40 different regions. Good question. So you have to kind of look at the UN M49 codes, or in the supplemental data, they have the territory lists that are in place. So anyway, you could use the same mechanism to be able to say that this feature is available across these regions. So if I see this region, then I go, okay, I know I can use this content and be able to lump it into a single piece there. Same way you can do with legal. So for instance, I have Australia, New Zealand, Canada, US, UK. I have like a limited set that's been approved by a legal team, and then if I have a different legal component, then I might have a different set of regions that's in place. So this is the idea that you have a legal statement that's composed together of different legal components to create a final legal element. Another part is your layouts change when you go from region to region as well. So, example, I may have a particular layout I want to have, and this is the example I had before for Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and then I got Canada, US, UK. But you may want to add in the match lists that I have a Latin layout, and I have like a Han S layout, or I have a Han E layout, to say, because if I'm including Asia, if I'm in an Asian UX and my locale is in Han S, then I want to have a Han S layout, because that may have an impact as well for what layouts I'm bringing in for name, I'm bringing in for address, etc. So example is I might have China in East Asia, but then I have the SAR regions of China, which are using Han T for traditional Chinese. So I may have a Latin, a Han S, and I may have like a match group SAR region for Han T to go into for going into Hong Kong and Taiwan. And my match group, since I have 030, if I go into Taiwan, since I have a Han T star, I would still be able to get a Chinese layout for traditional Chinese that would normally be specified like for Hong Kong and Macau. So now you have all these different pieces. They're broken into different places where I pull them from, and then your application does the resolution by going into either on the application, on the server, in your service to do the resolution, and you're not resolving to one locale, but you're resolving to multiple targets. Then those targets can then be used through whatever your delivery mechanism is, from CDN, for instance, to then be able to pull your components, your layouts to inside those components, and the content pieces for your generic content, application content, your legal content, to then render and build the final view that the customer gets displayed to them. And then the user's all happy and things are moving forward. But then you go, well, what if, and I'm in Thailand, the user experience is in Thai, and the user's entering an address based on layout you gave, it's all in Thai, but what happens if they start entering it in Latin script instead, because I want to put down a Latin address? Let's say it's going to be the shipping address we're giving to someone else. Their UX is still in Thai. You go, do I give them the state list in Thai still, which is going to end up going to someone else they can't put on a FedEx label? So you can use Unicode to do detection of what the script is, and then be able to load up the correct pull downs that you might have, or Salesforce, I guess they call them pick lists and so on, what the user is able to put into the form and change that dynamically so they don't send the wrong information. So examples where you can do that is if your layout has been pulled according to a script, then you have a script that then can be used to drop into a regular expression, and you're not looking to see if that script is present in the regular expression, but more that it's not present. So the example I gave here is everything from the beginning to the end of every field that the user has entered has to, if it contains any of your local script, then do your local pull downs. If none of it contains a local script, then you'll want to use either the script you detected, or usually it's a case of local script or Latin. And that's how Google lays theirs out with their lib address input mechanisms. So we talked about what is your locale, and pointed out that there is no one locale for a global application that has multiple features and so on. You also have got to consider the locale of the user, the locale of the content, the locale of the sender, which may be different from the locale of the receiver, You have the locale of jurisdiction if you have to generate any tax reports or information, registrations, and your logs because you have to debug this later. So be sure that if anything breaks on your application, it's written in a language that your support teams can understand, usually English, but if you're a Chinese application, it may be in Chinese. So I guess open for questions. I don't have a sample application to demonstrate, so it's more talking through the problems and potential solutions. Any questions? Yes?
I know my comment on this is locale matching. Does that support this through ICU sufficiently to help with this or resolve a lot of issues?
Yes. So the mechanisms that I demonstrated that are in supplemental data is a good place to start once you understand how the algorithms work. The algorithms are written up in TR 35, Technical Report 35 on the locale inheritance mechanisms, written in text, so you have to go from text to figure out, oh, this is looping, this does that. Anyway, once you have that, it's a good place to start. But what you have in the supplemental data is specific for CLDR. So there, for instance, are units and terms and things that it's either American English or British English, and that's it. It's either American Spanish or Continental Spanish, and that's it. But your application may need further granularity than what CLDR will provide. Yes?
I also wanted to give an example. When you were showing your example of Spanish for Colombia, this happened several years ago. I was in charge of adding locales for Google search, and suddenly out of left field came this, we have to add a new support for a Spanish translation at a lower granularity than Latin American Spanish. Because it turns out a particular translation for one term was very offensive to Chilean Spanish. So we had to add another layer of our fallback for just simple translations. And that was, let's say, a fire drill, because we didn't want to offend the entire country.
We've seen that before. I've seen that also happen for some other terms that have the wrong meaning in Argentina, if you're using like a mid-Atlantic Spanish, for instance. Yeah. And terms in the US, if you want to be closer to your audience, you may purposely want to use like a Spanglish version. Yeah.
There's often even domain-specific things like medical devices or computer terminology and so on. One of the fun ones that we had recently was the word for cart that's appropriate for Colombia means wheeled vehicle in Chile. So, same word. So.
And we even get that, even in the US, we get terms that develop on one coast that are different than what they're interpreted in another coast. So like the term wonk. On the East Coast, a wonk is somebody that's really smart about what they're doing. On the West Coast, it seems like something's wonky. It's just kind of weird. So, but it's, so good points. I think we have room for one or two more, one question. Else? All right, well, enjoy your lunch and don't get too much sunshine.